Thanks everyone for staying with us. You might be expecting me to talk a little bit about statistics because more or less has been on air throughout the lockdown, but I couldn't possibly top what David Spiegelhalter said earlier this evening. There's no way of following that. So I'm not going to talk about statistics. If you want to have my opinions about statistics, I'm actually publishing a book in September called How to Make the World Add Up. And I haven't told anybody about it yet. This is the first public unveiling of this book, How to Make the World Add Up. So if you think I might have something interesting to say about numbers and how to think clearly about them, then pop on over to your favorite bookshop and pre-order it. I'm going to talk about something totally different. I'm going to talk about, well, I guess you'll see what I'm going to talk about. A few minutes walk away from where I live here in Oxford, there is a slightly archaic museum called the Bate Collection. And the Bate Collection is closed 21 hours a day and all day weekends. It's quite hard to get into. But a few months ago, I took my son to the museum. He's 8 years old. He's a bit of a music nerd. He loves music. And the Bate Collection contains all kinds of wonderful musical instruments, glass and plastic recorders, and the harpsichord that Handel played on while he was living in London, and all sorts of things. And so we were playing around in the main space. There were instruments that you could blow through and instruments that you could hit. And as I was bending over to help him, actually I should show you. I'm going to keep my clothes on. Don't worry. I was sort of bending over, and I stuck out my backside. And as I did so, there was this sort of ooh sort of noise. Oh, it's very strange. I stuck my backside. Ooh. And I realized that just on the side where we were playing around with these obvious musical instruments, there was something I hadn't noticed. It was a theremin. It was on, and I had started playing the theremin with my backside. Not to put too fine a point on it. There you go. I recommend it. The Bate Collection, or as my son now calls it, the Butt Collection. You can play a theremin with any part of your anatomy that you want to. But it got me thinking about the technologies like that theremin just sitting there quietly, the technologies that we don't notice. So let me take you back to August the 4th, 1945, Moscow. The Second World War in Europe has come to an end, and the US and the USSR are positioning themselves for what comes next. And on the 4th of August, a group of young men and women from the Young Pioneer Organization of the Soviet Union, another Soviet Boy Scouts basically, present Averell Harriman, the US ambassador to the Soviet Union. They present him with a seal. I don't mean sort of one of the big sort of flappy animals that, no, a ceremonial seal, a carved ceremonial seal about, that's sort of so big. And it's beautiful. It's got the eagle, the crest of the United States, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And of course, Harriman hands it over to his handlers or to his security men, and says, "Well, check this out because it might be bugged." And they do what they can, but they scan it. It doesn't seem to have any electronics in it. Nothing substantial inside it. It seems to be completely solid as far as they can work out. And in any case, there are no batteries, and there's no wires coming out of this thing. So what harm could it possibly do? And Harriman then places it, gives it pride of place on the wall in his study, above his desk, from where it betrays his conversations for the next 7 years. The British were the first to figure out there was something going on. They would pick up radio broadcasts from inside the US Embassy, broadcasting Averell Harriman's private conversations. This is not supposed to happen. And the Americans figured it out too. But whenever they scanned the embassy for radio emissions, there weren't any radio emissions. There was nothing broadcasting from inside the embassy. And yet they would occasionally pick up broadcasts. It was very perplexing. And in the end, they realized what was going on. Inside this, this object, which became known as the thing, inside this object was a very thin silver membrane over a hollow cavity, and a very simple aerial attached to that. Nothing else. There's so little material, you couldn't detect it. And there's no power source. That's okay, because when the Soviets broadcast radio signals in, the aerial would resonate with the radio signals. It was using the silver diaphragm as a microphone, and it would broadcast back, drawing on the energy of the incoming radio signals. And that's how it worked. An absolutely miraculous device designed by one of the really unique minds of the 20th century, a gentleman called Leon Theremin. Theremin was already famous for inventing the musical instrument that, if you like, you can play with your butt. He lived in the United States. He was married to an American woman, Lavinia Williams. But he went back to the Soviet Union in 1938 for reasons that are not clear. Lavinia Williams said he'd been kidnapped by Soviet agents. Another theory is he went back voluntarily. But in any case, he ended up being forced to work for Joseph Stalin. Soviet-style innovation incentives. He was put in a labor camp and told to start inventing cool stuff. And he invented a number of things, one of which was the thing, this amazing bug. Now, that might just be a curious footnote in history. Were it not for two things. One is, I think, that the thing that Theremin designed is just a perfect metaphor for all of these pieces of technology that we think are too simple to pay attention to. The other reason is the same technology that makes the thing work is the technology in RFID tags. RFID, radio frequency identification, kind of very sophisticated advances on the barcode. An RFID tag is the technology that enables you to pay contactlessly with a credit card. It's a particular kind of RFID called near field communication. You have RFID tags in library books, RFID tags in the clothes that we buy in shops to make sure that we don't take them away without paying for them. RFID tags in cars to enable road toll systems to work. RFID tags increasingly used in luggage so that airlines, I mean, you remember airlines? They used to fly places. They don't lose baggage. I mean, it's an amazingly versatile technology, and it works. It's powerful because it is basically so simple. Because, as with the thing in Averell Harriman's office, it doesn't need a battery. And so you can have literally hundreds of billions of these things, quite possibly trillions of these things have been made, and they're just all over the world. And all they do really is they're powered by an RFID receiver. I mean, they can have batteries, but they don't usually. They're powered by the signal coming from the RFID receiver. So when you tap an Oyster card and enter the London Underground, for example, where when you tap your credit card, the power signal is coming from the receiver, and all the RFID tag is doing is to say basically, right here, right now, this is me, and that's enough. I should tell you, by the way, about the very best use I heard of an RFID tag. Some gentleman placed an RFID tag from his Oyster card you can use to use London Transport, and Transport for London, as I think we call it these days. He put the RFID tag on the tip of a magic wand. And so he could sort of step onto a bus and then just wave his magic wand and the RFID tag would be recognized. It's just marvelous. But that's not why RFID tags are exciting. RFID tags are exciting because they're an example of a technology that isn't especially sophisticated. It isn't especially complicated. It's cheap. And being cheap is enough to really change the world as far as technology is concerned. And one of the points that I make in my book, gosh, which is just well, wow. One of the points that I make in my book, The Next 50 Things That Made the Modern Economy, is that the world is full of these simple technologies that we overlook. My favorite example, when I was working on this book, everyone said, oh, you have to include the Gutenberg printing press. Gutenberg printing press, incredibly important. Yeah, the Gutenberg printing press is an incredibly important piece of technology, but completely useless without paper. I mean, the printing press was a way of mass producing writing, and paper was a way of mass producing a writing surface. And it's no coincidence that the printing press was only invented shortly after paper, which is centuries old from China, shortly after paper arrived in Germany. Johannes Gutenberg thought, there's something I can do with this. Before, the animal skin parchment you would write a Bible out on was so expensive that there was absolutely nothing to be gained from automating the process. You might just as well have done it the old-fashioned way, organic, artisanal, handcrafted, monk-written Bibles. You need both. You need the incredibly sophisticated printing press. You need the cheap, simple paper. A product so cheap that we now use it to wipe anything you like. But one of the principles I think we should embrace is the toilet paper principle. Once a technology becomes so cheap you can wipe your backside on it, it's cheap enough to change the world. And it's not just paper. The American Midwest and American West was revolutionized by the invention of fencing technology. The settlers were out there, they're trying to fence off the land, they're trying to keep away the indigenous people, they're trying to keep away the cowboys, they're trying to keep away the cows more than anything else. They're trying to protect their crops and lay claim to this land. And this is an enormous, literal land grab. You can't do it without fencing material. And there's not much wood out in the Midwest, so where does the fencing material come from? And the technology that changed the world was barbed wire. Barbed wire, which was advertised by one of the great salesmen, a guy called Bettermillion Gates, as lighter than air, stronger than whiskey, and cheaper than dust. That was the thing, cheaper than dust. Only when it gets cheap that it changes the world. Or the shipping container, a humble steel box, 8 feet wide, 8.5 feet high, 40 feet long, has done more to reshape global trade than all of the WTO agreements that you can think of. Even apparently sophisticated technologies, such as solar panels, have come down in price largely because they've been IKEA-ified. So much more attention has been paid to very large factories achieving economies of scale. A lot of attention has been paid to how do you assemble it in a simple way, so you can put solar panels on a roof with a smaller crew of people, taking a few hours rather than a few days. It's not all the amazing photovoltaic technology. I mean, that exists, that's remarkable. What's brought the price down has been the same kind of innovations that gave us inexpensive IKEA bookcases. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the pandemic, because while we're all focused on the vaccine, and I think rightly focused on the vaccine, which if we're able to get a vaccine by the end of the year, that will be a miracle of technology, well worth celebrating. We shouldn't forget the really simple innovations that have kept us safe or that have failed to keep us safe if we've had a shortage of them. So the masks, the gloves, the cotton swabs and the equipment necessary to scale up testing. If we'd had testing really scaled up in the UK, we might have, like Germany, been able to keep a lid on the epidemic much earlier and save tens of thousands of lives. That's not because we didn't have a vaccine, it's because we didn't have enough swabs and we couldn't get organized. I mean, these inexpensive innovations, they get overlooked. The glass vials in which we're going to have to put the vaccine, once we develop the vaccine, there's a shortage of them. There's even a shortage of something called adjuvant, which is a sort of an oil that makes many vaccines go further or work better. It comes from a soapbark tree in South America, and they finish their harvest in February, and the harvest doesn't start again until November. People don't talk about these things, but these things potentially change the world. So by all means, let's celebrate the sophisticated inventions, the internet and genetic engineering and the computer and the internal combustion engine, for all of the, the differences, good and bad, they've made to the world. But let's not overlook the simple stuff, and toilet paper and barbed wire, and maybe even RFID chips, because it's all too easy when you're playing around with the beautiful musical instruments to ignore the simple thing behind you. It might just creep up and surprise you, as it did me and my son, and frankly, as it did Avril Harriman. Thanks so much for tuning in. It's getting late. I'm really grateful to 5x15 for inviting me, and I hope you've all had a really cracking evening. Thanks a lot.